Welcome to another Mulready Minutes, a podcast about insurance for insurance people. We're going to dive deep into some insurance issues, speak to leading experts in the industry, talk about what is and isn't working in that space. We're going to dig into it all. Hi, Oklahoma Insurance Commissioner Glenn Mulready here with another episode of our Mulready Minutes. We're excited to have another great guest, and actually another guest from our department here with us. So we have Heather McClure with us today, a absolute leader in the captive world. So today's topic is going to be about captive insurance, and so great to have Heather here with us. And then Donald Ashwood is our captive coordinator at the Oklahoma Insurance Department. So Donald has joined us for this podcast. So we're excited to have Heather. I will read a little bit as we speak. Heather's in the midst of a transition, but she still is the queen of captives nationally here. I just made up that name.
Oh, great. I'll take it.
You can take that.
I'll take it.
But previously, Heather was Chief Risk Officer for OU Health, Oklahoma's comprehensive academic health system. Includes Oklahoma Medical Center, Oklahoma Children's Hospital, OU Medical Center Edmond, Stevenson Cancer Center, OU Medicine Breast Health Network, and Valier Rehabilitation Hospital. Through that, handled all their risk management, all their captives. I will just leave it as that. Heather's an attorney. She's licensed in Oklahoma, Texas, and Vermont with a legal specialization in healthcare law. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Heather to tell us about her new role that she just recently has assumed.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And excuse me if my voice is a little bit raspy today. I've had allergies, and but my voice is back online, and hopefully we can make it through this without a coughing fit. I will tell you that I've worked for OU Medicine in Oklahoma for the last 14 years. I'm an Oklahoma girl and came back to help them with their captive back in 2007. It's been a wonderful journey, and we've seen the captive grow and do so many things for not only the patients and providers at OU, but the citizens of Oklahoma as well. I just made a transition, as you stated, to Aon to be the Chief Risk Advisor for the U.S. healthcare practice for Aon. Aon is the largest risk and insurance consulting brokerage in the world, and so still going to be based here in Oklahoma, my home state, and be traveling across the country to spread the good news about different alternative risk financing tools, including captives, risk management, consulting, all that good stuff. So thank you again for having me here.
Good. And so with the new promotion I've given you, you still get to keep that moniker of Queen of Captives.
I
right?
do,
So we'll
yeah.
keep that.
Yeah, some people have called me a cheerleader of captives before. I like Queen better, much better.
Well, just a reminder, Mulready Minutes, we're here to talk about insurance, and we meet with some of the giants in the industry in different arenas. And so today's topic, of course, as mentioned, is captive insurance companies, which are created and owned by the entities that they insure. It's an oversimplification of what they do. But, of course, one example of that we opened with was OU and what Heather has done there. About 15 years ago, they were facing skyrocketing premiums, at times up to 300% increase in premiums, and the Board of Regents made a decision to go a different direction, and part of that direction was Heather. So Heather, maybe take a few minutes and tell us about what has happened there and how that all evolved, and walk us through your OU experience there.
Sure. It's a great story, and I love to tell it. I've told it a lot of times, and it needs no embellishment because it really is such a fantastic journey. So back in 2005, 2006, the Board of Regents looked at different ways that they could address the skyrocketing premiums that you alluded to, and they landed on the model of a captive insurance company. So rather than being judged by the risk profile of other medical institutions across the country in very different jurisdictions, in Cook County, Illinois, or in Florida, or in others where the juries were doing different things than they were doing here in Oklahoma. They looked at how they could fund in a solvent way, fund their risk, partner with experts across the country in actuaries and auditors and others who were doing really great things in the captive space, but still manage their own risk and manage that funding here. So they started their captive. It incepted in March of 2006 and wrote their first policy in July to start in July 1st of 2006. And they have a wonderful story to tell about really coming to grips with what that risk was, mitigating the risk, putting funding towards improvement in safety, patient safety, visitor safety, employee safety, establishing a board of directors that, again, partnering with the actuaries and others who were able to stabilize rates over those 15 years that they've been in practice. And now they have a very sophisticated, well-run captive that is meeting those needs from an insurance perspective.
So tell me, Heather, when that started, did they start with just the medical center, or did they do the full system right from the get-go, or how did that evolve? And then I guess secondly is, looking back 2006, early stages, what were some struggles or things that you might have done differently, or tell us about the launching, the start of that.
Yeah, great question. So they first started with the physician's practice, the academic faculty practice of the University of Oklahoma. So that's still a very large practice. It's now over 1,000 credentialed providers in Oklahoma City and in Tulsa and in some satellite locations. So they started by writing physicians' medical malpractice policies, and the hospitals were not included at that time. The hospitals were being managed by HCA at the time, and they had their own funding mechanism through their own captive RRG system at that time. Early on, some of the great things they did were to really get high-level leaders involved, and they looked at it, I think, immediately as a risk financing tool, a way to stop the flow of money out to commercial insurance companies and then not
stop the bleeding.
Stop the hemorrhage. I almost used that word hemorrhage, but it sounds almost too cute when you're talking about the medical system. But that's just it. They were hemorrhaging money at that point, and so it was really a financial tool, and it made and it does still today make a lot of financial sense to do that. I think that early on, I would have encouraged them even earlier to put in programs that now are very well established. They're risk grant programs where risk management is really looked at as the tool for risk avoidance or risk mitigation, and then empowering those on the front lines to come up with risk management ideas. Ideas for things that are happening in the daily practice that if they had funding or infrastructure in a certain place, the captive could put an amount of money towards that in pilot programs or larger programs to mitigate the risk. We ended up doing that later on. It was probably in our third, fourth, fifth year. But knowing what I know now about how critical that's been to lowering risk and improving patient safety, I think we would have done that a little bit earlier.
Yeah. And so in those early stages, I guess it's the Board of Regents' decision ultimately, but did it take much convincing of leadership or sales or that part of that process?
I came on that first year after the Board of Regents decided, but I know the history of it, and I know that there were some visionary leaders at the time who went in front of the Board of Regents and sort of staked their reputation on this idea that it could work. It was really a progressive idea at the time. Captives had been around in the country by then for over 20 years, 25 years, but not really as many here in this part of the country. So it was new, and I think it took some leaders who really invested time and energy and their credibility into it to say this can work. We know it's worked in the past. We're partnering with national, well-respected agencies who have done this before, and they all come here to Oklahoma and help us establish this. And the Board of Regents was convinced, and they were right.
Yeah, and it's worked out well for them from a financial standpoint.
Absolutely. It's been a win-win. It has it's saved millions, tens of millions, literally tens of millions of dollars for the university. and allowed those funds to be deployed into operations, which really is a benefit for the citizens of Oklahoma.
From a priority standpoint, what do you think is most important?
In establishing a captive?
Yeah, claim services and ability to
Absolutely.
respond and
So what I tell people who are looking at the idea of starting a captive is that you don't have to do everything. You don't have to be everything to everyone. You can start a captive and outsource a lot of those necessary services. So yes, you have to have an actuary to help you look at the feasibility of funding a captive and where where the money needs to be, what in reserves, in a prediction of what your losses are going to be in the future, and so how much you need to put where. You have to have someone to handle claims that come in because you're transferring risk to this captive. The captive is going to have to fund the resolution of claims. So you can establish your own claims handling, or you can partner with third-party administrators or other agencies to handle your claims. You need to be able to issue certificates of insurance to those that you're going to tell that you're insured for contracts or for whatever the industry is. And so you can outsource that. You can work with a captive manager to help put those insurance certificates in place and get those out. Depending on how many you do a year, you're probably not going to want to do them in-house. At the University of Oklahoma, we do about 7,000, well, just for the medical practice, not counting other lines, we do about 7,000 insurance certificates a year. So that could seem overwhelming, but there are partners out there to help you with that. Other variables would be, the risk management, depending on what industry you're in. Do you need to have risk managers on site? Or can you partner with companies who have risk consulting services to look at your entity or your industry and help you put together safety programs? Because very soon when you put the captive together, there's no doubt it makes financial sense. There's no situation in which it does not make financial sense to do it. But you're going to be very invested in the idea of lowering the risk, of wanting to have less claims and less injuries to your customers or your patients or your employees. And so you're going to want to invest heavily in risk avoidance, and that's where you're gonna want to focus. So those are all variables, though, that again you can do in-house or outsource.
Yeah, and it just becomes serious when it becomes your own risk.
Absolutely.
So that avoidance and mitigation, it seems like you just own a little bit more than when you're farming that out.
Absolutely, it's the difference between having an apartment and owning a home. It's your skin in the game, right?
Yeah, and I think, Heather, some of the things you just hit on, I think the message to those that might be considering is that it shouldn't be too overwhelming. The thought of that, it's not too steep of a climb. All of that you just talked about, all can be contracted out. So don't want anyone to think that you've got to start out with 50 employees
exactly.
to do all that.
It's scalable, very scalable.
Okay.
That's the beauty of it.
Good. And I introduced earlier Donald Ashwood, who's our captive coordinator at the Oklahoma Insurance Department, and does a great job interacting with captives that are domiciled in our state, as well as those that are thinking of coming to our state. And so, Donald, I'm going to toss it to you and don't get into too much of the weeds of captives, but let you shoot away at Heather here.
Or what would you presume to be the most critical component in a captive structure?
Wow, the most critical. So I would say the mission of the board. I would say it's got to be really clear what the captive is doing, what its vision is, that it is, because then that frames the discussion the board has on any other issue, whether it's finance or claims or safety. If the mission of the captive is to sort of come alongside the policyholder in its core mission, there has to be a really close tie to that. So if it is in healthcare, it's going to have to do with improving patient safety and having less patient injuries. If it's in agriculture, it's going to have a different mission, right? The captive is going to align with the mission of the policyholder. It may not be exact, but it's got to really align in energy or in any other industry with the mission of its policyholder or policyholders. And so to really define that early is going to be very important.
Okay. 2020 was an interesting year.
Yes.
It's a nice word to use, isn't it?
Yes.
For all of us.
Yeah.
But-
That it's over.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. It's just nice to be amongst people, right?
Yes.
So, but discuss for a minute the effect the pandemic had on the captive specifically.
Right.
But also, you have lots of national connections and what you've seen elsewhere, and tell us about any specific things that how that was impacted.
Right. So obviously, being in the medical world, it certainly had a huge impact on the hospital system and the physicians and those frontline providers and nurses and our communities. And so obviously all of us know that. But what you might not know is that the captive really had its moment to shine during that year. That's what we built it for. And that's what those who are building captives or who are running captives in Oklahoma and elsewhere are building captives for, to be there in times of crisis. And there was never such a time as there was in 2020. So we knew right away we needed to convene as board directors and officers to figure out what could the captive do. What we were seeing in our system is that we were not able, obviously, to do elective surgeries for a time period. It was affecting revenue. It was affecting our patients. It was really putting a halt to a lot of our operations, normal operations that we were not able to have during those surges in time. And so we needed to look at that critically. What did that mean for our risk? And what does it mean for the captive? And what we felt is that it actually, in a strange twist, lowered the risk that the captive was holding for the entity. And so obviously, when we think about it, during that time frame when we were not doing those surgeries, the risk of doing surgeries wasn't there.
Goes away, yeah.
Right? It goes away because all we were doing at that time was the trauma that came in. We had to continue operating for trauma. Many of our clinics were shut down. Most of our clinics were shut down for some period of time. So there were physicians who were not practicing during that time period. So my bosses gave me the task, wisely, of looking at how can we mathematically explore the percentage of risk in different specialties, and for the hospital system who has been under our captive for the last several years. What does that mean mathematically about the percentage of risk that was lowered? And so, crunching some numbers again with actuaries and people who do math
those actuaries again.
better than a medical lawyer does, we were able to really drill down on what that meant and come up with a dollar figure that we felt it would be not only right and ethical to do, but helpful to do at that time when, again, that revenue wasn't coming into the system. So the nimbleness of a captive allows that board who are they're right there, boots on the ground, embedded in the system, to make decisions about finances that can help the policyholders. And so we returned back in April of 2020, May of 2020, about $1.5 million to the physician's practice and the hospital practice in rebated premium because the risk just wasn't there. In addition, we were able to look at, okay, so what's happening in the policyholders' world, in the hospital system and physician practices world. We are having new providers that we need to come in and help us deal with the surge, right? We have nurses, traveling nurses. We need physicians to staff our COVID ICUs that were full. We didn't have enough physicians to be able to handle those. So those physicians coming in and those nurses coming in, how are they insured? We needed to look at how does that impact our risk profile. Are they coming in with different insurance plans and we're not going to be able to have joint defenses? At the same time, we were working with Oklahoma legislators and others on, what does the liability look like for treating this pandemic, without precedent of standard of care that would apply to an unknown virus. And so that joint defense being important to us, wanting to insure people of the same for the same patient. How could we come alongside that problem? And so working with others, we were able to write endorsements to our captive insurance where we could credential and insure new providers who were coming into our system to help us in Oklahoma treat those patients, and that was really important. So again, showing the nimbleness and flexibility of a captive, that you write your own policy. Of course, it's got to be approved by regulators, and it's got to be sound, but we were able to do that very, very quickly and put an insurance endorsement on our policy, which allowed operators to get physicians here to treat our patients. And that all happened within the space of 48 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, you use the word nimble, which is really good word. I mean, it allows you to respond much more quickly.
Absolutely. Than calling a 1-800 number of an insurance company that is, not here and may not be quite as familiar with the problem that is happening inside those four walls.
Yeah, not tuned in. Well, as we wrap up this piece, Heather, you've been referred to as a coach and a teacher for the captive model.
Well,
I gave you a new
today.
title. Yeah, I was going to say. So elaborate on that a little bit, just for the coach or teacher sort of label.
I will. Thank you. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a fan of captives, and I'm excited.
You don't hide it.
I don't hide it because I'm proud of it, and I love to teach the model because it's really so simple. And an Oklahoma girl like me caught on pretty quickly to this sort of niche field, and it's growing and growing. It's not so niche anymore because it makes sense. As you said before, when you have skin in the game, you're going to take care of that risk in a way that nobody else can. And so I have loved for the better part of my career, being able to talk to other risk managers and talk to those in the insurance industry about this model. And it is not, what I love about it is it doesn't exclude commercial insurance. So you're gonna need with your captive to partner with the commercial insurance world. And every commercial insurance company also has specialists to partner with clients' captives, and so it's not like you have to choose captive versus commercial. You can have a captive that is reinsured through the commercial industry, and most times that is what you're going to do. It just blends so well with the sort of moral philosophy, I don't want to get preachy, but of understanding your risk and not making it someone else's problem, right? That's how we teach our children. And we say, you be accountable and responsible for the risk that you create, and that's in your world, your family, your business, and you deal with it. And I just feel like that's, as a society, it's a wonderful thing to have in a risk financing vehicle. It's easy to implement, and it's wonderful to be able to teach it. So thank you for having me here to talk about it.
Good. Well, that's a good wrap up. Thank you for being here, Heather and Donald. Thank you for joining us on this episode. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about the captive world from the Queen of Captives, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.